Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
The United States military began major combat operations in Iran. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people. Its menacing activities directly endanger the United States, our troops, our bases overseas, and our allies throughout the world. For 47 years, the Iranian regime has chanted death to America and waged an unending campaign of bloodshed and mass murder, targeting the United States, our troops, and the innocent people in many, many countries.
What President Trump announced this weekend was not a warning. It was the opening salvo of a regime-ending operation in Iran. So welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. I'm Professor Nick Giordano. Make sure that you subscribe and follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, check out the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com. And share this episode with 3 to 4 people you know, because we have a lot to break down and people need to understand what's really at stake. They got to stop just looking at the here and now, what's right in front of them, because we are witnessing a geopolitical earthquake. Operation Epic Fury is fully underway, and as we speak, the map of the Middle East is being redrawn in real time by American and Israeli firepower. What you heard from President Trump, this is not just another Middle Eastern strike. This is one of the most consequential U.S. military engagements that we've seen in 23 years. And the Middle East, as we knew it, has completely changed. However, we have to rewind a bit. What President Trump announced Saturday morning should not surprise any of the listeners here at PAS Report. In January, I talked about Iran. I've been watching the military movements. I've brought it up. And just last week, I told my students to be prepared for conflict. In fact, on my Thursday night class, I told them that there was an 80% chance we were going to strike this weekend. Not because I'm a genius. It's because political science is predictable. International relations is predictable. And we also have to look at President Trump's State of the Union address. I went back to read the transcript of the speech after the attack on Iran, and I noticed that the president was very brief when he spoke about Iran, uncharacteristically brief. He repeats that he will never allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon, and that's it. I rewatched some of the media segments from the networks where the talking heads were criticizing President Trump's remarks, saying that it was very light on strategy, that he was vague, that the president had no plan. And while the media complained about the lack of detail, what were we witnessing? The largest concentration of American firepower in decades was already in position, other pieces moving into position, and it's clear that the president's plan was already operational. This is a masterclass in misdirection. And while it's not going to be the centerpiece of this episode, it is important to note that in the same State of the Union address, Trump said, "Stand up if you agree that the very first duty of government is to protect American citizens over illegal immigrants." And most Democrats just sat there. Now, fast forward to this weekend. They're calling Operation Epic Fury reckless. You have many Democrats that are going out of their way to defend the Ayatollah's regime, the brutality of the regime. Some are twisting themselves into a pretzel. They're acknowledging the horrors of the Iranian regime, yet at the same time, they're defending the status quo that was in place. But this goes far beyond the partisan politics of today. What we are witnessing will either turn out to be one of the boldest strategic moves in modern American history, or it will turn into one of the biggest strategic blunders in our history, right up there with Afghanistan. So today, we are going to treat it with the seriousness it deserves at the PAS Report, because the real story is what this operation is really about, beyond the surface level that you get out there. We have to get into the why and how and what happens next, because that's the most important aspect to this. And keep in mind that all the information I am providing is of this recording. In war, things change fairly quickly. And so what I say today, as of this recording, things may change. Now, Khamenei is dead. His compound leveled. Along with him, you have the IRGC commander-in-chief, the minister of defense, the regime's top intel chiefs, 40 other top officials, and this is historically rare. We aren't just degrading assets. We're decapitating the entire Iranian leadership, the theocratic leadership. Very few radical regimes survive a total removal of the inner circle without a complete internal collapse, and that's exactly what we're witnessing here, because the scale is staggering. You have 900 targets in the first 12 hours, Israel's contribution, Operation Genesis, 200 fighter jets in a single sortie, the largest combat flyover in the history of the IAF, and we achieved air superiority over Tehran within less than 4 hours. This was overwhelming force designed to ensure that the regime couldn't even pick up the phone to order a real retaliation. The first combat deployment of Task Force Scorpion Strike. What is Task Force Scorpion Strike? These are low-cost, one-way attack drones, the Lucas platforms. They are reverse-engineered versions of Iran's own Shahed drones. For years, Iran used these to terrorize the region and its neighbors, and on Saturday, we delivered American-made retribution. We used their own playbook to dismantle their air defenses, and it was done at a fraction of the cost of a Tomahawk or cruise missile. And that matters because we're watching a doctrinal shift. For years, Iran and its network relied on asymmetric warfare, cheap drones, proxies, harassment, intimidation, plausible deniability. But in response to our attacks, what did Iran do? They made a major miscalculation. They launched missile and drone barrages, not just at Israel, not just at our bases, but they targeted everywhere in Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. They hit Dubai International Airport. They targeted oil infrastructure in the kingdom. The Iranian regime proved the president's point for him. They are a regional cancer by attacking their neighbors who were actually trying to stay neutral. What did Iran do? They forced him into total realignment. I mean, the Saudi government actually called the Ayatollah and said, any hostilities, we're remaining neutral. The United States is not allowed to launch any attacks from Saudi Arabian soil, and yet they attack Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia has now summoned the Iranian ambassador, and they pivoted to full support of the mission. You also have other countries in the region now fully supporting the mission, including the entire Arab League. So it's important to note that Iran made a critical error. They tried throughout this process, they tried the same delay tactics that they've used under every previous administration. And somehow, some way, they missed that Trump is a different animal. At the same time, we also have to acknowledge that there have been at least 3 United States soldiers killed, dozens wounded in Iranian retaliatory strikes. There was a terror attack in Austin, Texas. Gunmen walked into a packed bar, began opening fire, leaving 2 dead, at least 14 injured. And I'm going to talk more about that later on when I get into the risks of this whole operation. But when we look at this, when President Trump announced the strike on Iran, he articulated 5 strategic objectives, and these are smart objectives. These are objectives that are simple, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. These are the objectives that we have been missing in previous wars, previous efforts. We look at Afghanistan and how mission creep came in, and then what was the objective in Afghanistan? To create some type of democratic Afghanistan? Well, how is that simple, measurable, attainable, realistic, or timely? You look at Iraq, same thing. So what did Trump say? Well, he stated that Iran's missile program is going to be completely destroyed. There's no nuclear program whatsoever. That he wants to annihilate the Iranian Navy, remove their proxy networks and the ability of those networks to strike at our forces, cause chaos within the region. And the final objective is the opportunity for a potential regime change by letting the Iranian people decide for themselves what comes next. Now, I want to make it very, very clear to you that the objectives laid out in this operation are very different than what we've seen over the last 25 years. And if you notice, objectives 1 through 4 are military objectives. They're not political objectives. These are smart objectives that are necessary to achieve military success. The last objective, all right, that one's a little bit harder to achieve. And that is what does a post theocratic Iran look like? But that last objective is still different than what we witnessed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Notice the president isn't calling for nation building. He's not calling for an occupation. He's not sending boots on the ground to rebuild. He's telling the Iranian people that it's up to them, that we will pave the way for them to determine their destiny. We will dismantle the regime's pillars of power. We will create a once-in-a-generation opening, as Trump stated, for ordinary Iranians to take control. Trump has publicly told the Iranian military and the IRGC forces to lay down their arms, and he is willing to offer complete immunity if they do. Take a listen.
To the members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, the armed forces, and all of the police, I say tonight that you must lay down your weapons and have complete immunity, or, in the alternative, face certain death. So, lay down your arms, you will be treated fairly with total immunity, or you will face certain death. Finally,
And that's one of the differentiating factors from Iraq and Afghanistan. This is how you speak when your plan is to break the regime's spine, force defections, but not break the entire country. It's not to say this isn't a high-risk strategy. It certainly is. But it's also not even close to say that it's the same category as a nation-building war. And the truth is, the president saw an opportunity. He calculated that the Iranian regime was at its most vulnerable it's been since the 1979 Islamic Revolution that ushered in the theocracy. There's economic strain, internal unrest. You see these mass protests, open defiance of the Islamic Republic. You combine the regime in a weakened state with the degradation of its military, the deterrent tools it has, the air defense systems that Israel took out last year, the strategic bombing of Iran's nuclear sites. President Trump made the calculation it was a now or never opportunity, and if the president didn't greenlight the operation, the likelihood of the regime able to regain its footing, regain its strength, rebuild its decimated air defenses would have been all but guaranteed. If left alone, the Islamic Republic would have hardened its systems to the point where it would have been more invulnerable. They would have replenished their proxy pipelines, used the next decade to continue to cause chaos in the region. The president looked at the board and he said, now's the time. That containment had failed. For decades, the rules-based order gave Tehran the gift of time to build their proxies, time to weather sanctions, time to spin the centrifuges. By greenlighting Operation Epic Fury, Trump essentially bet that the cost of the strike today is lower than a resurgent Iran from 5 years from now. He's gambling that by removing the head of the snake, the body's finally going to lose its grip on the Iranian people. And this will end the 47-year-old threat without having to put boots on the ground occupation in the place. It's the ultimate test of peace through strength. Can you collapse a hostile power from 30,000 feet? Or did we just open Pandora's box that no one's going to be able to close? We also need to look at and connect this to October 7, 2023. Hamas attacks on Israel. That was a pivotal moment. That attack was meant to ignite a conflict that strengthens the Iranian axis. Instead, it appears to have triggered a chain of events that has destroyed Iran. It gave Israel the opportunity to degrade Hamas and Hezbollah, to target Iran, and October 7th may go down as one of the biggest strategic miscalculations in the modern Middle East because the cascade it unleashed, it may end up with a Gaza where Hamas has no real role, a Hezbollah that has been decimated, and the ouster of their key backer, the Iranian regime themselves. However, we also can't sugarcoat this, and we have to deal with reality. Once war begins, all the theory and the planning go out the window. It becomes real, and the likelihood we see more attacks and death of U.S. service members is a certainty. We also have to worry here at home, particularly since we know there are Iranian agents here in the United States. What are they thinking? Are they seeing the writing on the wall? Will they blend into the shadows? I'm not dying for a regime that's going out of power anyway. Did they realize the regime is coming to an end, and so therefore they say, well, at least I'm in the United States? Or do they lash out? Do they strike at targets they've been scoping for years? Do they start launching cyber attacks on our critical infrastructure? This isn't just about geopolitics and Americans already paying the price in blood. we are seeing a debate going on in the United States. You see President Trump's coalition, it's beginning to fracture. Some say the president abandoned his promises, that this is another neocon forever war. We see some questioning whether the president has the authority to initiate this level of military activity since he didn't get congressional approval. You see the left going totally crazy. And some, and I think there are legitimate questions as to what comes next. How does this reshape the geopolitical landscape? And I want to talk about all that. I'm going to talk about everything, and we're going to do it after we get back from a quick commercial break. So everyone hang tight, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. So in the last segment, we dealt with the what happened and the why now. For this segment, I want to talk about the debate raging in America, the constitutional part. You know, all of a sudden, Democrats believe in the Constitution. It's amazing how now they want to invoke the Founding Fathers. These are the same people that brand our founding as nothing more than sin and slavery. They denigrate the founders, everything the founders created as evil, and that the system itself is the problem and must be dismantled. It even seems that some, no matter how despotic the Iranian government is, no matter how many Americans they've killed in the past, it seems that some of the Democrats would rather the Iranian regime remain in power than see a decisive American victory under this administration, all because it's Trump that made the decision. It really is a stunning display of principled hypocrisy. They've spent years arguing the Constitution is a living document, that the Constitution needs bypassed, it's old, it's outdated. And the moment that President Trump orders B-2 bombers to leave the tarmac, suddenly they become constitutional originalists. On the other side, you have some Republicans complaining that the president is exceeding his constitutional authority, but most Republicans are in lockstep with the president. You know, even though the Democrats want to invoke the Constitution a lot lately, you have Republicans trying to twist it. The reaction was instant. Within hours of Operation Epic Fury, you heard the words. This was unprovoked. It's an illegal war. This is imperialism, Iraq 2.0, fascism. You saw calls for a war powers resolution. You saw members of Congress say the president had no authority. You saw the usual cable news panels treat this as Trump is an authoritarian, and they were looking at his personality rather than the constitutional moment. Now, here's what we know. The president did notify the Gang of Eight prior to the commencement of hostilities. That is significant, but let's be very clear about it. Notification is not authorization. And if we do care about the Constitution, not the political party, the Constitution itself, then that distinction matters. And we have to be honest here. I'm not going to sit here and blow smoke. Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress the power to declare war. Not suggest war, not comment on war, declare war. That is Congress's role. The founders did not want one person deciding whether the republic goes to war or not. Madison warned that war is the greatest engine of executive expansion, that it accumulates power in the hands of the executive. It increases our debt. It increases secrecy. It weakens liberty. That is why the power to initiate war was placed with Congress. The founders wanted it in the hands of the many as opposed to one person. Now, under Article 2, that makes the President of the United States the commander-in-chief. But commanding forces is not the same thing as deciding when the nation enters war. Unfortunately, that distinction has eroded over the decades. Listen, I do believe that the President of the United States is currently in violation of Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. But we also have to look at the War Powers Resolution. It comes into play. Passed in 1973 after Vietnam, the War Powers Resolution was supposed to reassert congressional authority. It did the exact opposite. It says that the president may introduce forces into hostilities only pursuant to a declaration of war, to a specific statutory authorization, or a national emergency created by an attack on the United States. It requires notification within 48 hours, triggers a 60-day clock. On paper, there's a check on the president's power. In practice, it's become a blank check. It's become a procedural courtesy. You know, the War Powers Framework was not written and was never intended as a blank check for offensive campaigns. And that's what this is. I'm not going to sit here and lie. Sure, the president and his administration are going to spin it. They're going to say it's within defense, that we were acting against an imminent threat. But that's political spin. However, even though Trump is stretching the War Powers Act, the deeper question is, has the system normalized executive war making? I mean, let's stack the precedents. Let's stack the precedents of all the presidents that either ignored Congress or stretched executive power when it comes to using the military. You have Truman in Korea, Nixon with Cambodia, Reagan, Nicaragua, Grenada, El Salvador, Bush, Panama, Somalia, Clinton, Bosnia, Kosovo, Haiti, Iraq, Obama, Libya, Kenya, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Uganda. I think Uganda was just military advisors. They didn't actually engage in conflict, but you get the point. In the first Trump administration, we saw him take out Soleimani. Biden, you talk about Syria, Iraq, Yemen, expanded operations in Somalia, Niger, other African nations out there. Each administration pushes further. The next administration uses that expansion as the new baseline. The courts don't intervene. Congress doesn't assert itself. We have to stop pretending that this is unique to just President Trump. The fact of the matter is, several presidents have done this over the last several decades. And you can't have one standard for one president and then another standard for another president. Okay, the reason presidents have expanded their power is because Congress has abdicated their responsibilities, their authority. And that's something that I've long argued here at the P.A.S. report. This is a predictable outcome when you have legislative surrender. So Congress actually has to make a decision. They should make a decision after this war. Does Congress want to take back their authority under Article 1 or does it not? But stop applying different constitutional standards depending on who occupies the Oval Office. Consistency matters. And I want to look at the reaction of the American left because they are seriously demented. And I want to tread carefully here because this is serious. Within minutes of the strike, within minutes of President Trump's announcement, you began to see protests and calls for protests in New York City and other major cities in the United States. Understand, these were pro-Islamic Republic protests. There's no other way to say it. It's the same crew that did the pro-Hamas protests. You have the DSA, the Democratic Socialist Party of America, the party that Mayor Mamdani is part of, stating, and this is a quote, when the United States declares war, the duty of every U.S. socialist is to make sure it ends in our government's defeat. May God protect the people of Iran and may God damn the Trump regime. End quote. Think about that for a minute. These are Americans that are rooting for the Islamic Republic of Iran, the theocratic, brutal government, to defeat the United States of America. And notice how Mamdani or AOC or Ilhan Omar and other leaders on the left, notice how they haven't said really a peep about Iran prior to this. They've been really quiet. They never talk about the abuses at the hands of the Ayatollah's regime. They didn't say anything when protesters were being slaughtered. Anywhere from 25,000 to 60,000 protesters, IRGC members going into hospitals and killing protesters. And think about how their first statements on Iran was not about criticism of the Iranian government. It was about how bad the United States is. Think about that for a moment. Think about how they routinely defend regimes like Iran and Cuba and Maduro when he was in Venezuela, when we arrested him. And when it came to the protests, what did I see? I saw hundreds, thousands of printed signs being distributed almost immediately after President Trump's announcement. Pre-printed, coordinated, organized. That is not organic outrage. That is staged. That is infrastructure and speaks to what we've been covering here at the P.A.S. Report podcast, particularly the NGOs and the groups that are trying to dismantle the United States from within. You saw American activists chanting against the strikes on Iran, while at the same time, Iranian women were dancing in the streets all over the world, celebrating what they believe might be their first real chance at freedom. We saw this in America, in London, in Berlin, in Paris, in Sydney, in parts of Iran itself. And yet in New York, you have all these American women protesting on behalf of a regime that polices women's clothing, imprisons them for dissent, crushes them for refusing to comply with religious law. That's what they're defending. Think of the irony in that. It would be hysterical if it wasn't so tragic. Say the strikes are unprovoked. Unprovoked. This is a regime that has funded Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, militias across Iraq and Syria. This is a regime that has killed Americans, whether it's the Marine Beirut barracks bombing, the Kobar Towers bombing, 17 to 20% of the deaths in Iraq of our soldiers, tens of thousands wounded. This is a regime that crushes mass protests. To the Mamdanis and the AOCs of the world, where was your moral outrage when the regime was slaughtering its own citizens? Where was the outrage when women were routinely beaten in the streets for refusing to wear a hijab? It's one of the strangest patterns in modern politics, but it demonstrates what frauds they are. The American left reliably reserves its moral outrage simply for the West. They want to see the destruction of Western civilization, and they're still so stupid that they can't even explain what they want to come next. What are they calling for? Are they calling for an Islamic Republic here in the United States? And how's that going to work out for the lefties? But remember, this is the same crew, the Queers for Palestine, Trans for Palestine, same crew. So it just really is amazing. It's amazing how it saves its excuses for regimes that crush their own people. And it doesn't mean that every criticism of this strike is illegitimate. There are a lot of legitimate constitutional questions that exist. There are strategic concerns that I have. But defending the status quo of the Islamic Republic as some kind of anti-imperialist resistant movement, it's stupidity at its finest. And then we have to look at the right, because this is equally important, especially given the upcoming midterm elections. What I'm seeing is a fracturing of Trump's coalition, and it would be irresponsible to ignore. Many people voted for Trump precisely because in his final term, he did not entangle America in a new major foreign conflict. He campaigned against endless wars. He criticized the neocon playbook. He promised America first. Now, what do those voters see? They see regime change, regime strike, American casualties, regional escalation. They're worried about mission creep. They're worried about endless wars. They're worried about more blood and treasure. And they're not crazy to worry. I mean, history kind of backs them up. It gives them reasons to worry. So the fracture is real. It's not fringe. It's not fake outrage. We have a serious internal debate about what America first actually means. Does it mean strict non-intervention? Does it mean that you only do things here domestically and that's all America first means? Or does it mean preemptive force when threats reach a certain threshold to advance your self-interest on the world stage? So that's a debate that's happening right now. And while the midterms were shaping up to be about the economy, let's face it, a lot of most elections, particularly midterms, is how people feel economically. Do you feel your economic livelihood has improved? And then what base is more energized? And right now, it's the left's base that's certainly more energized. So we have to look at it, because now you have war and peace entering the equation. Does a portion of Trump's coalition stay home because they believe they've been hoodwinked? Does Republican turnout suffer at a time when the left is really energized? Or does a successful operation consolidate support around strength and deterrence? So this adds volatility to the midterm elections, and the volatility cuts both ways. You know, war doesn't go the way that the polling models go. War doesn't go the way you actually plan. And we could debate whether this was necessary. We could debate whether Congress should have voted on it. We could debate about executive overreach. However, we're there now. And we have to understand that. And too many people only want to see what's right in front of them. They don't see the full scope of geopolitics in a world of high-stakes geopolitics. You know, America First isn't just a slogan. It's a result. If this operation breaks the axis of terror, restores American deterrence, restores American dominance without a 20-year occupation and trillions of dollars, it's going to be the ultimate validation of the doctrine. But if it leads to a regional vacuum that turns into chaos, erupts into civil war, enemies fill it, well, the critics are going to have their day. President Trump is your high-risk, high-reward president. High risk, high reward when it comes to diplomacy and foreign policy. If he succeeds, the reward could be great. If he fails, it can be a spectacular failure. And in the next segment, we're going to look past the smoke and the headlines. We're going to see how this reshapes the entire global power alignment, from the streets of Tehran to the halls of the Kremlin and the CCP. We'll look at what happens if this works and the terrifying reality of what happens if it doesn't. So everyone, hang tight, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. So in the first segment, we looked at the what happened and why. In the second segment, we examined the constitutional and political dimensions to this here at home. Now we have to grapple with the risks and the enormous stakes that exist out there. Because if Operation Epic Fury succeeds, or if it fails, the consequences will stretch far beyond Tehran. And let's start with the stark reality. War is not a laboratory. It's not a board game like Stratego or Risk. It's human beings. Human beings in motion, reacting to danger, fear, and opportunity. And war has a history of miscalculations. And as of this recording, Iran has responded with missile and drone barrages across the region, hitting military sites, regional infrastructure, U.S. bases, American service members already killed. This is not theoretical. This is real blood. And we have to ask, what happens if the Iranian regime is able to survive? What happens if the Iranian regime regroups, if it hardens? And we have to look at those tangible risks. Too often, we only see what we want to see. We look at the rosiest of scenarios. We don't look at the dangers that exist out there. And I'm not going to sugarcoat this. We already saw an attack in Austin, Texas. Now, on the surface, you have the feds coming out saying that there appears to be a nexus to terrorism. He was wearing an Islamic shirt, talking about Allah. The attacker obviously is radicalized. Is the attacker directly linked to Iran? That's my main question. Or is this just a lone wolf? And that's what I don't know. That's what we don't know. We haven't gotten answers to that. Because the event may signal something deeper. May signal that the psychological impact of a foreign conflict in communities here at home is going to trigger some people to do lone wolf-style attacks. However, what worries me far more is what isn't theoretical. It's what's documented, and it's not the lone wolf attacks. Understand, under the Biden administration, Border and Immigration Enforcement encountered 1,504 Iranian nationals at the southern border, and these idiots, these morons, and Mayorkas and Biden himself, 729 of them were released into the interior of the United States. Yes, out of 1,504 Iranian nationals, 729 of them were released into the interior of the United States, despite being high risk. And guess what? Those numbers don't include any gotaways, people who entered, Iranian nationals that entered and were not interdicted at all. So we have no clue how many of the gotaways are in. Now think about that. If Iran's intelligence service, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, if they have operatives inside the United States, sleeper cells, this war dramatically raises the stakes of domestic terror risks. It's not in some distant future. We're talking about in the here and now, and we can't ignore that fact. It's something I've discussed with George Hill, who's been on the program numerous times, one of my best guests, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer. He's been on the program numerous times, another great guest. This isn't about alarmism. It's not about to instill fear. It's just recognition that wars abroad have consequences here at home, and it would be highly irresponsible of me to ignore the risk factors here at home and tell you everything is simply going to be okay because that's what you want to hear. I'm not going to do that. Understand, the stakes are high. We have to deal and be prepared for all scenarios. And yes, this could be a freedom movement, but could also be the beginning of a new violent era within Iran after the regime is decapitated. We've seen what happens when strong-arm dictators are removed. It creates a vacuum. I mean, look at Iraq after Saddam Hussein. Look at Libya after Gaddafi. Are we really going to argue that it worked out well for those two countries? I mean, time and again, history has shown that regime collapse doesn't automatically translate into a stable transition. Things fragment quickly, and if the regime fractures but it doesn't fully collapse, you have a lot of dangerous scenarios emerging. You have remnants of the IRGC and hardline clerical factions. They could attempt to try and consolidate power internally. You could see competing centers of authority emerge. One faction claiming legitimacy, another faction, Islamic revolutionary continuity. What happens if someone is able to get in charge that actually is worse than the Ayatollah? What happens when they start infighting? When the authoritarian regimes lose the head of the snake, the body doesn't always fall apart quietly. Sometimes they begin to fight themselves. So you could have military factionalism. You could have internal purges going on, armed clashes between loyalist and reform groups. You could have a full-on all-out civil war. We have to look at these nightmare scenarios. When power vacuums open up, there's going to be a scramble for that power. And the most organized and brutal group, not necessarily the ones that want freedom, the most organized and brutal ones are usually the ones that fill that void. We can't ignore proxy networks within and outside of Iran that operate independently. We have to look at what happens if a refugee crisis happens. Regional powers getting indirectly involved that may be forced to chaos. So when I say the stakes are enormous, I mean it in both directions. Yeah, this could be a moment where the regime falls, the Iranian people get a real shot at freedom, they take that shot, and they run with it. But it could also trigger instability as well. We can't repeat past mistakes. Look at the de-Baathification failure in Iraq. It didn't work out too well for us. Peel back the leadership without dissolving the entire state. You need a structure in place to replace the theocratic regime when it does collapse. How do you neutralize or reintegrate the IRGC when they control not just the guns, but a massive portion of the national economy? And is the IRGC simply going to disband? And do we not remember what happened with the Fedayeen in Iraq? We like to romanticize freedom movements in the United States and around the world. I mean, this is historically accurate. Psychologically, it's accurate because it lulls us into a false sense of security. The false sense of security that we have this belief that people naturally want liberty and freedom, that good will triumph over evil. Think back to how we were supposed to be greeted and cheered on as liberators in Iraq. See, too often we look at the best case scenarios rather than plan for the worst. And you have to have a sober balance. The desire for freedom is real, but there are a lot of unanswered questions that exist. Is this a limited degradation or a sustained campaign? What is the scope? How long is it going to be? What is the duration? Is it going to be days? Is it going to be weeks? Is it going to be months? Are we going to see any type of regional escalation? Are we going to see Hezbollah and the Houthi rebels get involved, proxy networks in Iraq and Syria get involved? Are we going to see other players want to enlarge this conflict? And what replaces the regime? Who fills the power vacuum? That's a key question that needs to be answered. And the key line that I really want you to hold on to before we go to a quick break is the fact that opportunity and danger are both maximized at the same time in these situations. And if you don't hold both realities in your mind simultaneously, you don't fully grasp the moment at hand. So everyone, hang tight, and when we get back, I'm going to wrap it all up. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. So now it's time to talk about the geopolitical implications. Whether you support the conflict or not doesn't matter at this point. What's done is done. We're at the point of no return. We have to follow through on our commitment. I mean, once you call for regime change and start military operations, you can't allow that regime to remain intact. And we can't go back and change the decisions that were made. We have to look at the present and then move forward. So there are a number of ways that this could go sideways. However, don't think for a minute that the administration isn't fully aware of the failures in Iraq and Afghanistan and how mission creep and the vague, stupid objectives of a democratic Afghanistan and open-ended commitments, how they destroyed public trust, how they damaged the United States, how they cost us so much in blood and treasure. So Trump is not going to make this same mistake. This is not a blind march into nation building. It's a calculated gamble. He likes to gamble. He likes to take risks. And he's making a calculated gamble that decisive force, if he applies it surgically and overwhelmingly, is going to achieve what 2 decades of incrementalism and containment never could. The geopolitical benefits are enormous, and that's what Trump sees. His eye is on the prize. If Operation Epic Fury is successful, We achieve our objectives. The Iranians are able to put a transitional government in place. It's able to create stability. And I get it. Those are big ifs. But if they're able to happen and do that, the rewards are enormous. First, the proxy groups that have plagued this region with violence, death, and destruction and instability over the last several decades are going to be neutered. Groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, militias in Iraq and Syria, they all draw their lifeblood from Tehran. You remove the head of the snake, they're going to die off. Israel's no longer going to face an existential threat. More countries will sign on to the Abraham Accords. I believe that, including a new free Iran. Now, when we look at the Gulf states, here's where it gets interesting, because we will see more stability introduced into the region. There's going to be less of a focus on conflict and more on continuing the modernization programs that are taking place. However, there is a caveat here. Remember, nations operate within their own self-interest. And the fall of the Ayatollah is a double-edged sword for these countries. Many of these countries are happy the Ayatollah is gone. They're not shedding a tear. They despise the man. They despise the regime. However, they also now have to recalibrate, and they're trying to figure out what's in their interest. See, they knew what they were getting with the Ayatollah in power. But a peaceful Iran that has close ties to the United States, that may represent a threat to them. You know, a growing, open, free, prosperous Iran, it's not just a humanitarian story. I know that's what we want to look at because that's the feel-good part of the story. But is that in the interests of the other Arab nations? And Iran, a free Iran, a Persian Iran, that's an economic and geopolitical force, a free Iran that attracts capital, a free Iran that can unleash a highly educated population, an Iran that could reclaim its historic role as a major regional player, well, that's going to change the balance of power inside the Gulf, and that's what Arab countries are worried about. For decades, the Ayatollah's regime provided a predictable villain. A hostile Iran justified military budgets, it justified security alliances, internal controls across the region. Well, you remove that threat, and suddenly that old equilibrium begins to disappear. So Gulf monarchies are going to recalibrate. They're going to face competition not from a revolutionary theocracy that's exporting chaos, but from a modernizing state integrated into global markets and potentially aligned with the United States. And that is why the fall of the Ayatollah is a double-edged sword for these Gulf countries. Sure, it removes a destabilizing force, but it introduces a new regional dynamic, one that's built not on fear, but on competition. And that competition, if it's peaceful, if it's economically driven, it's healthier than proxy wars that we've been witnessing over the last several decades, but it does present a threat to the Gulf states, because if Iran becomes stable and its power and influence is increasing, well, power is a zero-sum game. And so who's losing power and influence? So a stable, free Iran would not just reshape the Middle East militarily. It's going to do it economically, diplomatically, culturally, and it's going to be interesting to watch, marking the end of the Islamic Republic's export of revolution and the beginning of a different kind of influence. And can the Gulf states get along with this new Iran? And that is why, if this works, the rewards are not incremental. If this goes successful and the Arab states could get along with this new Iran, it's transformational for the Middle East. But we could step back even further. It's not just a Middle Eastern story. It goes beyond that. This is a global strategic moment. If Iran's capacity is significantly diminished, or if it moves toward internal transformation, Russia loses a key geopolitical partner with deep ties to Tehran. How much has Iran helped Russia fight on the battlefields of Ukraine? A lot of the weaponry that Russia is using, particularly the drones, have come from Iran. It's all about weapons supply network, sanctions cooperation, regional leverage. It's something I spoke about in the January episode. So Russia is going to lose an enormous amount of power and influence with the fall of the Ayatollah. But it also rocks China as well, rocks China to the core. China relies heavily on Iran for the deeply discounted oil. Consider that the top suppliers of China's oil imports are Russia, Iran, and to a much lesser degree, Venezuela. I think Russia is about 20%, 22%. Iran at 13%. Venezuela is only about 5%, but still significant because when you put that all together, 40% of Chinese oil relies on these three countries. Consider what we've seen over the last year. China importing less Russian oil because of U.S. sanctions and the way the sanctions are working, also the drop in prices of oil. Maduro is out in Venezuela, where we now have control and influence. The collapse of the theocratic regime. Come on, think about how much pressure, internal pressure, that places on China. So as the Middle East threat environment declines, then you really get the big fear from China. The United States relocating attention and assets toward the Pacific. This is where the real geopolitical competition is going to be. But I really want you to look at it. China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, and Cuba. The axis is broken. China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, and Cuba. The strategic axis that has pushed toward multipolar pressure on the United States is beginning to break. And Venezuela, Maduro's gone. That alone shifts influence in Latin America, undercuts Beijing's ability to try and use oil leverage there, get military cooperation there, intel cooperation. Cuba, you have the government under enormous pressure. The entire economy is collapsed. You have diplomatic pressure. U.S. officials, we're now getting reports of high-level talks between Marco Rubio, elements of the Castro family's next generation. There's a potential transition of power being discussed. Further isolate Havana, undermine Beijing's influence and their footprint inside of Cuba, and the collapse of the Iranian theocratic regime, the largest remaining Axis power, would be the strategic linchpin in this pattern. Taken together, understand that these trends are not random. These were deliberate policy decisions designed to weaken our adversaries and push the world closer to a U.S.-led order once again. And if successful, it's going to slow down the movement toward that multipolar world that has been emerging over the last 20 years. And that's precisely where America First comes into focus, not as jingoistic isolationism, but as a coherent strategy, a strategy that reclaims our influence, a strategy that stabilizes global alignments and that deters our adversaries. See, what many don't realize, what few commentators even acknowledge, is this. A free Iran, an Iran free from theocratic hardliners, it's not just ideologically preferable for freedom-minded Iranians. It is firmly in the United States' strategic and economic interests. The only problem is everything has to go right. There is no room forever, and that is the central danger, because my fear is grounded in history of flawed policy decisions by the Washington elite over the last several decades. What have we seen? We've seen poor planning, we've seen mission creep, we've seen corruption, ambiguous objectives, the rise of the NGOs, the abandonment of exit strategies, the holier-than-thou virtue signalers. And even if this administration is successful, all the gains can be easily lost in the next administration if the strategic foundations aren't institutionalized and reinforced by Congress and long-term planning. You have a lot of people in positions of power in Washington, D.C., throughout the United States that have looked at it where we are no longer allowed to operate in our own self-interest, and we got to operate what's in the global community's self-interest. And the answer is no. We have to operate what's in our interest. That's how we make policy. But we also have to recognize that as Trump expands the power of the presidency through actions like Operation Epic Fury, the next president, whether Democrat or Republican, is going to inherit those powers. And if the next occupant in the Oval Office chooses to use them differently, if you have a less competent individual in there, I mean, don't forget, Biden got in 2020, the consequences for our republic can be profound. Look at how much damage he caused in just 4 years. But I'm not going to go down that constitutional rabbit hole. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. Right now, we have to stare down the strategic moment that we're in. The Middle East just changed. Whether we like it, whether we intended it, whether we predicted it, it doesn't matter. It has changed, and it has changed forever. Opportunity, danger, maximized at the same time. If this works, it reshapes the regional order. It weakens our adversaries for the next generation. If it fails, it will be a disaster. It will invite escalation. There'll be instability. We'll see retaliation. There is no middle ground to this. I want you to understand that. It's either great success or an abysmal failure. And we are past the point of pretending that there's anything else out there. The reality is the United States can dismantle a regime's pillars of power. We have created leverage. We can open the door. What happens next in Iran is going to be an interesting moment in history. And we can't walk through that door for the Iranian people. We saw what happens in Afghanistan and Iraq. So that burden, the opportunity that they have now belongs to the Iranian people. President Trump saw a window of vulnerability that we may never have saw again. And he's betting on the Iranian people. He's betting on the end of the 1979 order. And as you're about to hear, he's making it very clear. The world has changed, and the hour of freedom is at hand if the Iranian people want it.
Finally, to the great, proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand. Stay sheltered. Don't leave your home. It's very dangerous outside. Bombs will be dropping everywhere. When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take. This will be probably your only chance for generations. For many years, you have asked for America's help, but you never got it. No president was willing to do what I am willing to do tonight. Now you have a president who is giving you what you want. So let's see how you respond. America is backing you with overwhelming strength and devastating force. Now is the time to seize control of your destiny and to unleash the prosperous and glorious future that is close within your reach. This is the moment for action. Do not let it pass.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.